Hello, this is Mark Herman, and what you see here in the shot is my very poor example, a very poor example of all my poor examples of my idea of art, but it does set up the conversation I want to have. This is my newest game, will be coming out from GMT Games, called Fort Sumter, The Succession Crisis, 1860 to 61. And what's kind of different about this is, first off, this is a card-driven game. And you know I have some familiarity with card-driven games. And it's also, unlike many of my other games, a 20 to 30 minute game. And so that's going to be a little bit of a shock for people. And so what's going to happen in this particular game that is coming out from GMT, hopefully by the end of 2017, early 2018, is that one side is going to take the Unionists, that is in fact the Union government, and I'll describe that briefly, and the other side is going to take the secessionists, the people leaving the Union, which in essence sets off the Civil War. Now, what's important, a lot of people don't know a lot about the actual crisis, but let me just sort of run through some of the high points of this thing really quickly. And while we do that, we're going to take a quick look at the map, so we're going to pan over to the map now, and we'll see, hopefully that will go reasonably smoothly. I've got a cameraman for the first time, and so we'll see how this goes. Okay, now what you're going to find is that in November 6th of 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected President of the United States. This is a situation where he is elected as a minority. He does not get the popular vote, but he wins the Electoral College, something that we've all seen happen recently. And as soon as he does this, this sets off a fury amongst many people who feel that this is the thing that's going to kill slavery, the way of life of the South, etc. And of course, that's still a very big issue, as we've all seen recently, sadly enough. And so what happens is that President Buchanan is still president, right? So he's a lame duck president. And Buchanan is trying to sort of keep things under control, but he doesn't do a very good job of it. And on December 20th, South Carolina succeeds from the Union, and that sets off the succession crisis. And unlike a lot of other crises in history, this one has no off-ramp, because in the beginning of January, starting around January 9th and ending around the very beginning of February, 6 more states leave the Union. And so that then creates a situation that has Jefferson Davis being inaugurated as President of the Confederacy at the end of February of 1861. And Abraham Lincoln doesn't become President of the United States until I think it's March 4th of 1860. And so remember, Jefferson Davis was president before Abraham Lincoln was. And then things really start to head into a terrible spin. And it starts to come down to the issue of these federal property in the South. And Lincoln, in his inaugural address, says that he's not going to fight with anybody, but he is going to maintain his oath, and he's going to maintain and control federal property. The South cannot abide by that. And the two main points were Fort Sumter and Fort Pickens. And so the crisis revolves around that. And the way that the game is, how you win the game is, if you can cause your opponent to blunder in the crisis, in other words, have less victory points, you gain the advantage of the crisis, which then sends you off into the Civil War that comes with the bombardment of Fort Sumter on April 12th around 4 o'clock in the morning or so. So there it is, and now I'm going to describe this game in a bit more detail. So let me first start off by saying something that always comes up. This is not the final map. In fact, right now, as I speak, Mark Simonich and his team of brilliant artists are re-rendering this, but I want to give great credit to Francisco Colmenares, who did a phenomenal job with the prototype map, just so you have something much better than the PowerPoint slide that I handed him many months ago. So let me sort of talk about the map. The map has several sections. You've got a victory point track, and you've got victory point markers. There's rounds. The game is played in 3 rounds, round 1, 2, and 3. The first round is the election of Lincoln. The second round represents the Buchanan lame duck period. The third round represents Lincoln and Davis now in control. And then there's a special final crisis, which I'll describe in some detail. Right now we have all the summaries on the map. Whether they'll stay or not will be a discussion. Now, the spaces. There are 4 sets of 3 spaces. So you have the political spaces, and again, for all you folks who like symbology, we have there will be symbols, so you can, besides colors, there'll be symbols, so you don't need the colors necessarily to play the game. But you've got three political spaces. You have Washington, Montgomery, which was at this time became the capital of the South, and the northern state houses. So those are the three spaces that are associated with each other. Washington is what we call a pivotal space, and each of these sets has one pivotal space. Pivotal spaces are very important to control in this game because they give you the ability to leverage influence on the other two spaces. The third kind of space, the next one is these red spaces called the armament spaces. So you have the federal arsenals, Fort Pickens, Fort Sumter. Federal arsenals is the pivotal space. Then we have public opinion, newspapers, which is the pivotal space, state assemblies, which are the various conventions that withdrew and ran the influence of, was the public opinion that took the states out of the Union, and abolitionists, which really represent the abolitionist movement, but as seen through the church and the clergy, as preached in the North. And the last set of spaces is the succession spaces, which is the border states, which is the pivotal space, the Deep South, which is again all the major states that left became the Confederacy, and Texas. And Texas was the last state to go out of the original seven. And so that is how the map is represented. And what's going to happen in the game is tokens are going to get put into the spaces, and the person with the most tokens will control the space and ultimately score victory points. But now I'm going to describe how we get to that in another moment. Okay, Fort Sumter is based on my earlier For the People design that came out in 1999 and is currently being published by GMT Games. And so the format of the cards is very similar. So what you have is a card. All cards have a value of 1, 2, or 3 on them. And then there's a field of the event. So in other words, you can play any card for its value of 1, 2, or 3. But if you want to play the event, only the Unionist player can play the Sam Houston event, whereas only the Secessionist player can play the Florida Succeeds event. However, the Union can use this for a 2 card, and the Confederates can use this for a 1 card. The red cards are joint cards. Either player can use the event or the value of 3. And so what you have is just a little bit of a selection here, but there are 40 cards in the deck, and so you should know that in no game will you ever use more than 24 cards, so a large amount of replayability. Now, you'll also note that on each of the cards, there is a color value with a name, and so I'll just flip these 3 around to show you what we're talking about here. There are the spaces are sets of 3 spaces or sets of 4. So you have armament, succession, and public opinion. What's going to happen is each round of the 3 rounds, 1 card is going to be saved face down, and during the final crisis, the only part of the card that matters is its color and how it will affect that set of 3 spaces during the final crisis. And so there are a lot of strategies around it, but I would suggest for your first game that you try to save 1 red, 1 blue, 1 succession, 1 public opinion green, 1 armaments red in your deck and see how that works in the game. But there are other strategies like saving all of 1 color, for instance, is another way to play the final thing. And I'll show you in some detail later. And so again, cards have 2 parts. They have the value, the color who allows what you play what event, and then the one that's saved, only the bottom part is used in that last 4th round final crisis. So there is another deck of cards called the objective cards, and they obviously have different backs than the strategy cards. Each round, a player is dealt 4 strategy cards and 2 randomly selected objective cards. The player, so let's just say that in the beginning of your hand you end up with these cards. And each space is only 12 objective cards because there's only 12 spaces. And then you would look at your hand and you say, oh, there's my hand of cards. I got a pretty good hand, by the way. But also, of course, I didn't shuffle. And I had these 2 cards. And you say, you know what? I've got a strong political card in Jeff Davis. The Peace Commissioners affects Washington. I'm going to save Montgomery as my objective space, and this would be returned to the deck unseen by the other player. And so this is your secret objective card, which, by the way, I'll show you where it would be kept on off the board, that you would reveal at the end of the round for a potential victory point. what makes the game run is the crisis track. Every game this is how the track looks at the beginning of the game, and so there are 16 spaces, starting with space 15, going down to space 0 for both sides. See? 15 to 0. You will note that for the first up to space 11 is just, bunch of tokens. And what happens in the game is you would play a strategy card, and let's say this is the successionist going, and it's Abraham Lincoln. So they can't play the event, but they can play it too. They would take these 2 tokens off the board, revealing these spaces, and they would place them in any combination of spaces on the board. So let's say we just saw that our objective space was Montgomery. You could put 2 pieces in Montgomery. Of course, that might reveal to the other player what you're doing, but let's just leave it at that for now. Now, then the Union player would play a card, and in this case, it's Gustavus Fox. Now, since it's the Unionists playing, it's a 2 card, or they can add up to 3 tokens if you go in an armament space. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to play the event because I can, and I'm going to place these 3 pieces in, and they have to go in an armament space. So I can put them in any combination of these red spaces, but I'm going to put all 3. We're going to put 2 into the pivotal space and 1 into Fort Sumter, which is, again, a legitimate move. And so that's how pieces come off the crisis track and into play. Now, what happens is, when you reach the 10 space, so let's say you've played some more cards, and you now reveal the 10 space. The 10 space falls into the yellow zone, and so what happens is as you take tokens off the track, the crisis accelerates. So as soon as either player breaks into the 10 space, you get 2 bonus tokens. And by the way, all bonus tokens are placed into your token pool, which is right here off the map. You cannot take pieces from the track if you have any tokens in your token pool. You have to always play from here first, but if you need more, you get them from here after you've used these up. Now, what ends up happening is at some point, somebody is going to breach the orange zone. The first one to breach the orange zone gets 3 tokens, but the other player gets the Peace Commissioner, which will be a white meeple, I believe, in the final. The Unionist player, because they did not breach the tension zone, gets a Peace Commissioner, and any space they put the Peace Commissioner locks that space out from any adding or subtracting of pieces. So assuming that you had a situation like this, where the Union had 3 pieces here, and let's say the Confederates, the secessionists, later to be Confederates, were here, Peace Commissioner here, nobody can play in or out of Washington, which means Washington is kind of locked up with negotiations, and it's all tied up with those kind of things. Now, as you move down the track further, the first player to break into the final crisis zone gets 4 pieces, but loses a victory point. So assuming the score was like this, you would lose a victory point at that point. And that it would never happen that you wouldn't have any victory points, because this would happen fairly late in the game and there would be a score. And so first guy in gets 4 tokens, but they lose a victory point. The second guy in, so let's say now the Union breaks into this part of the game, you would look, and these guys would be sort of here on the map, you only get 2 tokens, but you don't lose a victory point. And so that's how the crisis track works. And so as you accelerate, the guy who's pushing the crisis further is giving capabilities to their opponent, because what you're in essence doing is you're losing the moderates. You've got 2 extreme factions, the Unionists versus the secessionists, but as you push too hard into the crisis, you lose the moderates to the other side. So that's what's being represented by the track. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you actually how a round of the game plays. You'll see how quickly it plays, and then we'll kind of close this thing out. So each round, everybody gets 4 cards. And by the way, I have not looked at the deck. Benji here can attest to that fact, who's shooting this thing. Whoops, try not to move the map.
It's true.
It's true, there's my guy. And we're now cleverly, obviously these will be real cards in the end. This is just my, and everybody gets 2. So let's look at what the Union, this is the Unionist side, this is the Southern side. Okay, so there's Montgomery and Northern State. Not much of a shuffle there, but what the heck. And here are their cards. Okay, so we now see their cards, and based on what I see here, well, I'm going to have to pick one of these 2, because again, I don't have, you'll note by the color of the type helps you understand very quickly, what the event affects, and you'll note that this is only one, there's one political type here, but it's a Southern event, so the Unions can't use it. So ultimately, I'm going to be playing here, I'm going to go for Northern State houses, and what you do with your hidden objective is you place it See right here on the map, there's a place for hidden objective, you place it there. And this goes secretly, no, the other player wouldn't have seen you do this, obviously, and this goes secretly back in. And this hand, of course, would be up and the other player wouldn't see it, but for now we're going to just keep our cards. I'll play them out so you can see the cards playing out. Now let's look at the southern hand. Now they have Washington and border states as their two events, and here's what they ended up with. Now, this is an easy one. Virginia waivers is places pieces in the border state. I got the border state, so I'm going to place this as the hidden agenda card, and Washington will go back into the deck. So that, again, that just it looks like I have a hand that's as a layup for the border state, so we'll kind of play that way. And we're going to leave these cards out again so we can see what's going on. So whenever the score is tied, and of course at the beginning of every game, the score is tied at 0. The Union player goes first. And the big advantage for the Union player is at the very end of the game, the second tie break is if it's still a tie, the Union player wins. So that's his compensation. But at all times, the player with the lower score goes second. So that's how it balances the game naturally. So the Union's going to go first. And, I actually didn't look at this hand very carefully. I didn't see I had Stephen Douglas. Now, Stephen Douglas is a 1 card. But you'll note that Stephen Douglas's event allows to place 3 tokens in political spaces. So I'm going to play Stephen Douglas as my event. And since I have no pieces in my token pool, the first 3 pieces come off the track. And I'm going to place 2 in Washington and 1 in the northern state houses. And this card is discarded and out of the game. So now it's the southern player's turn. And the southern player goes, oh, okay, again, I'm not playing cleverly. I see all the cards. They're going to play Virginia waivers. And for this, they get 3 pieces in the border states. They're going to take 3 pieces. They're going to put them directly in the border states. So that's the event. And so that's the second card play. The third card play, what am I doing here? Okay, we got Major Anderson. I like Major Anderson. Major Anderson's add up the 3 tokens to Fort Sumter. So again, I'm going to use the event to get a more powerful event. And you're going to see what's going to happen here in the crisis is, and this happened historically, these have to go into Fort Sumter, and so they go there. But it was Anderson actually transferring from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter early right after the election, when South Carolina succeeded, that actually precipitated the beginning of this crisis. So that's a very appropriate play. And because the 10 space now is void, you can see that it's open, and that's in the yellow zone, the Union player gets 2, after the card play is complete, gets 2 tokens, the 2 bonus tokens for accelerating the crisis, getting some leverage over their opponent. Thereafter, getting ahead of the other player is not an advantage. Now, we're now looking at this event. Now, you'll note that this is a Union event, so the South is just going to play this for a 2 card. So they play this for a 2 card, they take 2 tokens, and they're going to go back into Washington. They don't want to give up control of Washington. And now this is the last card play for the Union. Unionist player, again, I just got 2 cards, and they're both green, so it literally does not matter which card I play. They're identical from how the game would be affected. They take 2, we're still within the yellow. Oh, excuse me. I have 2 pieces in the token pool. I cannot take from here if I have 2 here, and so these are the ones going into play. And I'm going to place 1 in Montgomery and 1 in Washington. And this is the last card, and secretly, this becomes my final crisis card, and it's placed right over here. And there'll eventually be 3 cards here, and it'll be played out. I'll show you how to do that later with the final crisis. Now, the last Southern play is a choice. They're both 1 cards, but do I want an armaments card or succession card? And I think that the South wants to have leverage over wants to fight for the red space at the end of the game. And so as a consequence, I'm going to save this card, play this for a 1, and you'll note that as they pull this 1 off the map, they go, okay, I'm going to go into the Deep South, and that's going to be an interesting play you'll see in a moment. And I've saved the armaments card, and the round is now complete. So now what happens is we have pivotal space movement. So you look at the pivotal space, which is Washington, border states, newspapers, and federal arsenals. If anybody controls the space, they can do one of 3 things. And the player who has the low score goes second, and if it's a tie, the Union goes first. So the Union goes first, and you'll note that they have 3 pieces in Washington, 1 in northern states, and 1 in Montgomery. And so consequently, they already control the political spaces because they control all 3 spaces, have more pieces in all 3 of the yellow spaces. And so the second thing you can do is you can either move 2 pieces, but I wouldn't want to move out of Washington and lose control of it. I can remove 2 enemy pieces from any political space, which is what I'm going to do, or you could move 1 and remove 1. So I could also do this For some reason, I wanted to reinforce the northern state pieces, northern state capitals. That also a legitimate move. So again, you can either move 2, remove 2 of the opponent, or actually you can remove yourself if you wanted to, but that's rarely done. Or you can move 1 and remove 1. So we're going to do move 1 and remove 1. Now the South controls the border states, which is the pivotal space. They have one in the deep South. They're just good, and there's no Union pieces to remove, but they're going to move 1 piece into Texas to give them control of those 3 spaces. And so now we score them. So we note that the Union doesn't control the red. They only have Fort Sumter. Nobody controls the green. The Unionist player controls the yellow. They get 1 victory point. The South controls the secession spaces. They get 1 victory point. We now look at our objective cards. And we'll note that the border states, and again, we go in the order of the guy with the high score or ties go to the Union. We go, northern states are controlled by the Union. They get a victory point. You will note that then you get to, we go and see what the other guy does, and he has the border states, and he gets a victory point. Now, in the order again of the player with the high score going last, we get to do the objective events. And it says here that holder of the card gains 1 VP. After objective VPs have been rewarded, both players can remove, and with this card I can remove 2 tokens from mine or the opponent's from any combination of political and public. I'm going to remove that Confederate piece from that space, and this event is now out of the game. The South now has the border states, and the border states has a similar capability, except that you can remove 2 tokens from any of these or 1 from anywhere, and so they're going to remove 1 from Montgomery. Now, it does not, you don't get back the victory point, but again, the North, at least at the moment, won't control it going into the next turn, the political spaces. That is, in fact, an entire round, and we advance the round marker, and because the score is still tied at 2 all, the Unionist player will go first. Okay, I have now fast forwarded to the end of after the beginning of the final crisis. The 3rd round is over. The score currently is Union 8, Secession is 7. The score was tied, but on the last card play, the Secessionist gained a bunch of tokens and got the 4 extra tokens for the final crisis, which, as you can see, gave them a lot of pieces in their token pool, but they lost a victory point. So the score was tied, and they gave up a victory point to get a lot of tokens, which, by the way, if you have a lot of tokens in your token pool, you can get a victory point back. So it may have been a sort of a wash play the way it was played, but that's not important. Also, because the South was ahead of the Union earlier, the Peace Commissioner ended up in Washington, so Washington has remained under, it's locked up, but as you can see, it remained under Union control. And the first thing you do and then the final crisis is now going to occur. Now, as it turns out, you'll see the South saved 3 of a kind, and so they're going to order those cards, but it doesn't really matter what order they put them in because they're all the same, because it doesn't matter what the values are. Whereas the Unionist player, as sort of an alternate strategy, and you'll see how that plays out, played 1 of each color. And you'll note that there are no yellow cards because so controlling the political going into the crisis is a natural advantage in the game. It's an asymmetrical advantage. And so I'm just going to do this randomly and we'll see how it kind of comes out. Okay, so those are the cards. The first thing you do is, in the final crisis, and it's right here in the chart, the first thing you do is the Peace Commissioner, there's no more peace. The Peace Commissioner is out of the game. Then you order the decks, which I just did, and now you're going to roll the cards 1 at a time. And here's what happens. They're different. So the player who has the high score goes first. The Union player has a secessionist card, and so what they can do is they can move up to 2 pieces from anywhere into blue spaces. And so the Unionist player goes, okay, the political can't happen. I'm going to take these 2 tokens, and I'm going to put them in Texas to deny control of the blue spaces to the secessionist player. Now red looks around and says, oh, okay, now that I see the situation, I have red, I don't have Fort Pickens, I'm going to move 1 piece from the Deep South into Fort Pickens. I can move a 2nd space, but not worrying about that yet. So now that's the first round of the second round. Again, public opinion. Well, you'll note that the Union has a situation where they have 2 to 1. They can move up to 2 pieces, so they're going to take 1 from here, and they're going to take 1 from the newspaper space, and they can come from anywhere into the green spaces, and so it goes there. So again, you're flowing things into that part of the crisis. The South this time goes, okay, I got armaments again. Kill it. So now, we've moved the Unionist player. Now the Southern player, now you can take tokens from anywhere plus your token pool, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to take 2 from here, and we're going to go into, we're going to lock up Pickens. We can never have more than 4, so they already got Sumter, and they're going to put 4 into the Federal Arsenals to make sure they don't lose control of that. And now the last card is rolled. Now what's different here is when they match, instead of maneuvering, now it's direct confrontation. So this is a military action, think of it this way. And starting with the player with the high score, which is the Unionist, they have to remove 1 piece from the red spaces or 2 pieces from anywhere. Now as it turns out, because of they're a little bit lighter in tokens than the South, they're actually going to have to pull 1 from the Federal Arsenals, and so this piece goes into their token pool. The South has plenty of pieces, and they're just going to pull 1 from Fort Pickens. The final crisis is concluded, we do a final score. And so here's how the scoring goes. Union player has first, he gets his score first. They get political, they get a victory point. They control the green spaces right now, they get a victory point. They don't control the red, and they don't control the blue. Fort Sumter is a point, and then there's points for most pieces and tokens, so that's the Union score. Now the South has scored. Well, because of this cool play in Texas, remember they went all armaments, and this was the key moment early on, the South will not get the succession of space score. However, the South will, because that's how they played it, get the victory point for the armament spaces. Secondarily, the South gets the only time Sumter scores a victory point is at the end of the game. They won the victory point for Sumter. Last, if you have 3 or more tokens in your token pool than the other side, and it's right now 5-1, you get a victory point. There's the final score. It's 10-10. Now the tiebreakers. Whoever controls Fort Sumter, the tiebreaker, wins the game. The South controls Fort Sumter, it's a Southern victory. And so that is how the game is scored at the end of the game and how the game plays out. And this, by the way, this all took, and if we were playing it out quickly, it's about a 20-minute to 30-minute game, depending on if you're a quick player or a slow player. And again, I play with my wife all the time, and we usually get done in about 20 minutes plus or minus a minute. And so there you have it. There's Fort Sumter. So again, this will be coming out from GMT shortly. It's on the P500. It's made its numbers and will be produced should be out by either very late in 2017 and very early in 2018. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, post your remarks on BGG, GMT, or on the various boards that you may like to favor, like Consum World. So there you have it. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in Fort Sumter land. There you go. Nice.